Hi there, I'm Mike Creevy for Homeschool Connections, and I'm excited today to be joined by Dr. Kristi Moore to talk about her courses. How are you doing, Dr. Moore?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, and it's a delight to talk to everyone I can from Homeschool Connections and all the instructors, being able to share about their courses. So why don't you tell us first a little bit about your own background a little bit and kind of what brought you to Homeschool Connections?
So, I am a psychology professor at Angelo State University, and I ended up at Homeschool Connections just because I ran into Philip Campbell at a conference
Ah,
and said, "How is that teaching, middle and high
yeah.
schoolers?" And through conversation, he found out I was a psychology professor, and he's like, "Could you teach high schoolers?" And I said, "Yeah, yeah, I would love to do that." And so that's actually how I ended up here at Homeschool Connections. It's been a wonderful thing for me to be able to actually speak, particularly from a Catholic perspective. So that's been
Sure.
kind of the best thing.
And what courses do you have currently as far as, maybe the prior recorded courses versus some live ones coming up?
So we have two recorded courses right now, and that's college preparatory psychology, and then we have child development in recording. And those two will also be live again next year. And then we have two new live courses. I'll be teaching adolescent psychology and social psychology live.
Wow, okay. And how does that how does that go? Might be sort of a too broad question, but I mean, again, like you said at the outset here, that it's not exactly, of course, the same kind of scenario, right? Teaching in the college classroom versus the more middle school or high school age range. Was there an adjustment that had to be made there, or do you find different challenges, unique opportunities for that high school age group?
So for the high school age group, what I generally do is I've actually been using so far a lot of the college textbooks that I still use, but I bring it down a little bit. So I'm not
Mhm.
covering all the material in the textbook itself, and I'm picking out kind of the important things in each section. So we're focusing on a few things versus focusing on everything.
Hmm. Well, there's only so much time, right?
Right.
No, I only ever took one basic like psychology course in college, and I loved it. It was just so much fun. And then later in the army, actually, I got involved with it was a positive psychology kind of based training program, a resilience program for soldiers to try to help deal with negative emotional patterns and the thought patterns, that kind of stuff. And so it's sort of an amateur interest of mine, I guess, or and what kinds of questions maybe do you see come up in the high school classroom, or what kind of interest do you see those high school students particularly have in the subject?
So the first thing that always comes up is when people think about psychology, they think about the clinical counseling areas. Like that's the
Hmm.
number one thing. People are like, "Oh, when are we going to talk about psychological disorders?"
Do
And
they
I'm always like,
self-diagnose also? It's a
"Yeah,
lot of
all
that
that." Yeah.
I've done. Yeah.
So I'm always like at the end of the semester because there's way more to psychology than most people think. So
Hmm.
that's usually one of the first things that kind of comes up when I ask the students the first week, what are you most excited about? What do you want to talk about? And it tends to be those areas, the clinical counseling. And the other thing that comes up too is they want to talk about some of these issues that we're dealing with in our culture that they see, and they want to know
Yeah.
what the psychology viewpoint is on that. And what's shocking to a lot of them is what we teach in psychology that's actually research science based isn't in disagreement with church teachings. And that
Hmm.
often shocks students a good bit. Now, certainly there are people that look at it from different angles and have different perspectives. So I'm not saying that everything in the field lines up, but if you really look
Hmm.
at the research itself, it matches. And students are very happy and assured to kind of see that that's the truth.
Well, and I've always been so fascinated by just the etymology, right, of psyche being not just brain. Like I think a lot of people think in a very, I think the tendency, at least from what I've seen, I imagine seems to be a very materialistic kind of pull by a lot of folks. But
Yeah.
um, do you see an opportunity here, maybe not to expressly give it sort of a theological dimension, because I guess that depends on your approach and everything, but do you see a real opportunity here to look at the question of the soul as more than just this material aspect?
Yeah, and people forget that psychology comes out of philosophy and theology. Like a lot of times modern psychology kind of ignores those roots. So I like having the opportunity, and I don't go into it in a whole lot of depth with high schoolers, but yeah, the history of psych, started with theology and philosophy. And then it wasn't until we had some of our modern scientific techniques, that we added kind of the science aspect in, which is great because once again, it doesn't have to be, in opposition. They can work
Right.
together beautifully. And so that's probably one of the best parts for me is like I get to show students that. And they're like, oh, I had no idea. I just assumed like, all this stuff we were wrong for psychology. And I'm like, no.
Right.
Actually, most of them out there are wrong and taking psychology
Yeah.
way out of context and misinterpreting studies.
Right. It's like who do you think made our brains and our like the unique, intricate,
Yeah.
connections and this and the importance. Like I really reflect on a lot with the important dual sort of complementary nature of the works of mercy, for example. Right now, when I go over my class with my students, yeah, here's the corporal works of mercy and these bodily, or preferably sort of bodily needs, that kind of stuff. But it was like the spiritual works of mercy seem to, in my estimation, also include a lot of these psychologically connected important things and the emotions and
Mhm.
how complex we can be. And so, yeah, I think that's got to be a really interesting thing to be able to approach for sure.
Yeah, it is. And once again, a lot of the modern theories, they line right up. When we talk about motivations and our needs as humans and what we need, yeah, all of those theories have, theological, philosophical, spiritual, different angles, but they all have that. Like they realize that human beings are not just, here. We need food, obviously, we need water, we need air to breathe, but we're way more complex because we can meet all those needs and you could still, not be doing very well. Okay. You could
Right.
still fail to thrive.
Yeah. I still need a hug. I still need to pray. I need to do something
Exactly.
artistic. Like there's a whole
Mhm.
rich dimension
Mhm.
there to it. Wow, so
Yeah.
cool. So what's can you just, yeah, we only have a little bit of time, of course, of these videos. I want to talk to everyone for like 20 minutes at least, but can you give us an example maybe of something that you might do in your class, a particular um, I don't know, project or approach, something that you kind of engage the students in the classroom setting?
So I really like in lectures to be interactive. So I have that chat going the whole time. I have encouraged students to turn on their mics if they want. Not everybody does, but
Right.
I want them not to interrupt per se, but when something pops in their head and they have a question, I want to address it as we go through. And then I ask a lot of questions too. So I expect the chat to kind of be busy. And it gives them kind of the opportunity to sort of like engage with it instead of just listening to me, but kind of going back and forth. I usually in class show a lot of the classic experiment videos for
Hmm.
classic psychology, the original things like the Bandura Bobo doll experiment that a lot of people have seen where the little kids are
Right.
hitting on the Bobo doll because they saw the model do it.
Right.
And then what I often do for the homework is I'll have some type of current event issue that
Hmm.
relates to what we're discussing. And I'll have the students figure out, based on this issue, what does psychology really say about this? And is it being portrayed accurately based on what we know, or is it an inaccurate portrayal?
Okay. Oh, very good. Well, I'm always so sad when I have to wrap this up, but just to ask you here, Dr. Moore, as far as just where families can learn more, where students can learn more about the classes, what's a good resource for them to check out? Anything in addition to our Homeschool Connections instructor page?
Besides that, families are welcome to email me. My email is christy.moore.homeschool@gmail.com. And so I see my name is going to be on here. So that's how you spell it. But
Yep.
christy.moore.homeschool@gmail.com.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Moore, thank you so much for stopping by and sharing about your Homeschool Connections courses with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, God bless you.